again, everyone. Welcome back. We are finishing up chapter 5 today of Chaos by Tom O'Neill. This chapter is called Amnesia at the LA County Sheriff's Office. And this next section is called Chasing Kitty Litzinger. I think I'm going to drop a picture of her in here. All right. While Bobby Beausoleil was busy torturing Gary Hinman, he left his girlfriend behind at the ranch. Kitty Litzinger, 16, was pregnant with his child, and in his absence, she set off a chain of events that gave the sheriff's office another chance to nab Manson. Will they take it? We'll find out. Litzinger had moved out to the Spawn Ranch to be with Beausoleil, but she'd never been a perfect fit for the family. Now that she was pregnant, Manson mistrusted her, fearing that she'd compel Beausoleil to leave the group and raise their child. God forbid that happen, right? Litzinger, in turn, was uneasy around Manson. He was always speechifying about the end of the world, fooling around with guns, and heaping abuse on anyone who crossed him. So, with her boyfriend showing no signs of returning anytime soon, Litzinger ran away from the ranch. LASO sheriffs found her on July 30th and took her in for questioning, since she was a teen runaway. She told them everything she knew about Manson, that he was an ex-con who threatened her life and her relatives if she left the family, that there were drugs and guns stockpiled at the ranch, and that many of the family were runaway girls. And underage too, herself included. Police sent her home to her parents in San Fernando Valley, but she'd proven so informative that Bill Gleason drove out there to interview her again 11 days later in preparation for the big raid. Incidentally, I cracked open Helter Skelter a few times now, and the way it's laid out, you can't just find the raid. I even chat GPT'd, where can I find the raid on Spawn Ranch in Helter Skelter? And it's really hard. It's laid out kind of by dates, and where chat GPT sent me, it must have been a different version of the book because I cannot find it. Like I said, it is such a little blip in the book compared to how enormous it was in reality. I will continue to look, and I know one of you asked me to read from Helter Skelter about that. I will do it if I can find it, but if not, I'm just flipping through page or page by page, and it's a pretty decent sized book, so if and when I find it, I will do that episode for the one person who asked for it. Unless you comment on this one that you no longer wanted. It is interesting, the discrepancy of it though. Okay. This would have been on August 10th, just a day after the bodies had been found at Cielo Drive. So the timing is just so crazy with all this stuff, the raid being so close to it. This girl getting arrested and telling her story, and it's all so, like I said before, we're on this side of it, so it seems so obvious, so many of the clues. But I guess when you're a detective, there's a million little things you're looking at, so won't fault them too much for that. But they also seem to cover for Manson a lot and let him go for things, so I don't know. Not willing to give too much of a pass yet, if at all. All right. I couldn't find his full report in the LASO files, but Ed Sanders wrote about it in The Family, and he included an eye-opening detail. Litzinger asked Gleason if the Black Panthers were behind the Tate murders. I had been programmed to believe it was the Panthers who did it, she told him. That's interesting. That's interesting language if that's how she said it. I'd been programmed. But we'll keep going because that theme will come up over and over. You guys are going to be shocked, I promise. Not that shocking yet, but it builds. It builds, I promise. Okay. That remark should have raised a red flag. The timeline is the key. This conversation took place when the bodies at Cielo Drive were barely cold. As Gleason knew, Litzinger had been away from the Manson family since August 1st, when she fled the ranch. So if she had in fact been programmed to believe that the Panthers killed Tate, the programming must have occurred before the murders by someone who was responsible for them. Gleason should have suspected that Manson, or at least someone at the Spawn Ranch, knew more. He told me he had no memory of discussing the Tate murders with Litzinger and found it unlikely that he had. The murders had only occurred a few hours before. There probably wouldn't have been anything much on the news at that time. In fact, the bodies had been discovered more than 24 hours before he interviewed her. They dominated the news. Even though Litzinger had cooperated with police, she apparently couldn't decide where her allegiances were. On August 15th, she ran away again, fleeing her parents' home and returning to the Spahn Ranch. That same day, Gunther and Whitley, still searching for accomplices in the Hinman murder, though for some reason they never checked the Spahn Ranch, learned that Litzinger was Beausoleil's girlfriend and immediately deemed her a person of interest, issuing an all-points bulletin for her arrest. So see, again, it's the police dropping the ball. Like, once again, I know that we view this through the lens of the resources we have now, and maybe the resources, well, they definitely weren't as, they didn't communicate with each other as well, and a lot of stuff was on paper, and if you didn't see the memo, a certain memo, I guess you could release somebody, but it's another catch and release of someone who shouldn't have been, I guess. On August 17th, the day after their colleagues raided the Spahn Ranch, Gunther and Whitley visited her parents. I found Whitley's interview notes in the LASO files. Litzinger's parents confirmed that she was pregnant by their main suspect, that she'd been living at the Spahn Ranch until August 1st, and that she'd run away in the night before, though they didn't know where. Whitley did note that Manson had personally phoned the Litzinger home the preceding week, and that Kitty had spoken to him. She was probably terrified that he was going to come hurt her or her family, because earlier it said that. Because it makes you wonder, like, why would you go to all the trouble to escape this situation and then go running right back? In fact, at the very moment of that interview, Kitty Litzinger was in LASO custody. She'd been picked up with the rest of the family in the raid. And here, to my mind, the credibility of the LASO deputies stretches to its breaking point. Gunther and Whitley had just posted the bulletin for Litzinger's arrest. They just learned that she'd been living at the Spahn Ranch, along with their primary murder suspect, and yet they didn't go to the ranch looking for her. They did nothing. It's weird. It's just weird. It gets weirder. All they had to do was stop by, and they would have learned that everyone from the ranch was in jail at the Malibu station. They could have gone there, interviewed Litzinger, and potentially cracked the Hinman and Tate LaBianca murders 4 months earlier than those crimes were. Talk about some major ball dropping. But was it on purpose? We don't know. Why didn't they go? For 2 reasons, Gunther told me. First, he and Whitley had never heard about the August 16th raid, even though their colleagues conducted it, and it was the largest in state history. Bill Gleason backed them up on this. We were 2 independent units, he told me. We really had no reason to contact each other or even knew about the investigations going on. Gleason said he purposely kept everything quiet about the raid, but he'd also said that a few stray LAPD squad cars had found out about it somehow and came along uninvited. Plus, as Bugliosi reported in Helter Skelter, the raid was on the front page of the local section of the next day's LA Times, beside a story about the still unsolved Tate murders. Gunther's second reason was that Kitty Litzinger's parents told him they'd already been to the ranch to look for her, and they'd been told she wasn't there. They'd been told she wasn't there. They lied about everything. Like, would you just believe that? I don't know. I would think if you had a warrant for somebody's arrest, you could search around a little bit more than that, but what do I know? But did he really expect a runaway's friends to turn her over to her parents, especially when everyone knew the cops were sniffing around for a murder suspect? He didn't even attempt an answer. We just sat in silence for a while. Gleason had organized the raid. It would seem that it was only a matter of time until he realized that Litzinger, whom he'd interviewed just 6 days earlier, was sitting in one of his jail cells while homicide detectives sought her out. He'd given me copies of his files on the case. One of them, a timeline of the investigation, had an entry dated August 17, 1969. Whitley and Gunther tell Gleason that Litzinger is wanted for questioning in Hinman murder. So see, that seems Shady, right? But Gleason told me that he didn't even know Litzinger was arrested in his own raid. She'd been booked under a fake name because everyone in the family used aliases. Okay, we have seen that over time and time again, so I guess we can give him a pass on that. I reminded him that he'd already known that. It was in the search warrant affidavit he wrote before the raid, and Litzinger herself had told him. Plus, one of the arrest reports in the LASO files said that he'd taken it on himself to learn the true identities of each suspect. Okay, so forget it. I'm not going to give him the benefit of the doubt. I guess unless she used another name, another alias, it's possible. He was unmoved. She was just another face, he said. I had a lot of things going on that day. I doubt if I would have recognized her. Litzinger was released with the rest of the family on August 18th and remained with them at the Spawn Ranch until mid-September when they all moved to Death Valley. No one ever went to the ranch to look for her, despite the All Points Bulletin out for her arrest. The last time I saw Gunther was in January 2005 when I visited him to go through a timeline I'd made of his investigation of the Hinman murder. I told him that I couldn't believe he never went to the Spawn Ranch to solve the case. The police had Bobby Beausoleil in custody, and they knew he'd called the ranch asking for help. They knew his girlfriend lived there. They knew he'd stolen 2 of Hinman's cars. If nothing else, surely they would have gotten a warrant to search his last known residence, the ranch, for evidence of the theft. But Gunther stuck to his story. He looked at the floor and said, maybe we just made a mistake. I don't know. I wasn't a seasoned crime reporter. Most of what I knew about the criminal justice system, I'd gleaned from the news, police procedurals, and legal thrillers. So I went to Kimberly Kupfer, the chairman of the criminal law section for the California State Bar, and asked her to walk me through the standard operating procedure in murder investigations. Kupfer contradicted Gunther on every point. She said it was standard practice to go to a murder suspect's last residence, whether it's a ranch, motel room, or rat hole, to search for evidence, especially in a robbery homicide like the Hinman case was. The fact that the detectives didn't go was highly unusual in her estimation. Though I knew I was really pushing my luck, I made another call to Gunther in February. I know you've always told me you'll never hear an untrue word from Gunther or Whitley, I said. But is there anything you haven't told me that would make me better understand your actions in this case? No, he said faintly. Why faintly? Okay, I said, one last question. Were you ever told by anyone to back off the Manson family or the Spawn Ranch in your investigation of the Hinman murder? No, he said again, this time almost inaudibly. I was not. I couldn't ask Whitley the same questions. After my first meeting with him, he refused to speak with me again. Now, is that because it's stirring up old, trauma? Or is it because they have something to hide or something they're ashamed of? I don't know. Okay, the next section is called chicken shit. Sometimes seemingly ancillary people would completely refocus my reporting. Such was the case with Louis Watnick, the former head deputy DA of Van Nuys. I wanted to talk to Watnick precisely because he had nothing to do with the Manson case. He worked in the same office as the DAs who had, so he could offer some valuable perspective without feeling boxed in. I went to visit him at his house in Thousand Oaks. He spent a while reading my documents in silence. And then he sighed. Chicken shit, he croaked. This is all a bunch of chicken shit. The size of the raid, the fact that the DA's office kept releasing Manson when they had enough evidence to charge him, or at least violate his parole. It dovetails right in, he said. Manson was an informant. Was he? He was something. I believe he was something, but we're getting there. It was only a guess, he conceded, but an educated one based on his 30 years in the job. It wasn't the first time I'd heard the theory. One of my LASO sources had wondered if Manson had his finger in a bigger pie. An intelligence pie? Having been in the office's intelligence division, he'd seen stuff like this before. What happens in those situations is either he's giving up somebody bigger than himself, or he's on somebody else's list as far as a snitch, or he's ratting out other people. And if he were informing for someone else, the DEA or the feds, no one in the LASO would know about it necessarily. But how? Because they were the ones that kept releasing him. They'd have to know something. Robert Shern, the DA who authorized the raid only to dismiss the charges, had made the same suggestion. Another possibility, sheer speculation, is that Manson may have been an informant for somebody. But LASO deputies had all denied it. Of course, Watnick said when I told him that. Confidential informant means they're confidential. Neither of us could say what or who it was that Manson would have any decent information about. Drug dealers? Watnick wondered if it had a political dimension, given Manson's antagonistic relationship to the Black Panthers. Maybe, he continued, muttering more to himself than to me, it was someone big, possibly the FBI. Or CIA. True, the search warrant was littered with references to Manson's fear of the Black Panthers. He thought the group was about to attack the ranch. One memo I'd found even said that Manson claimed to have seen carloads of Negroes on the property, photographing the family. A fire patrolman reported that family members had told him they'd moved into the canyons because they'd killed a member of the Black Panthers. Which, if you remember, the dude was not a Black Panther, but Manson thought he was. And it turned out he didn't actually kill the guy. You know, there's an old saying, an enemy of my enemy is my friend, Watnick said. So if Manson figured out this black-white confrontation, he may have been giving out information to the FBI, who had a vendetta against the Panthers. Hearing this from Watnick, someone from the DA's office, but unaffiliated with the case, boosted my confidence. Looking at the lengthy search warrant again, he kept grumbling. Helicopters, agents carrying automatic weapons, 3 different departments, 4 weeks of official surveillance. They had this massive raid, and everybody's released 2 days later. He shook his head. The more that he's released, the more I feel that he was released because they'd get more out of him by having him released. And it's a big whoopsie that he was in charge of the murder of 7, if not more, people. So maybe that's what they're trying to hide. I don't know. I think it's more, guys. He said they'd been watching this guy for something large. The thing I wonder about is who was watching. It's getting interesting, guys. Watnick urged me to go back to Gleason. He knew the detective well, he said, and he trusted him. Why did Gleason just roll over when the DA's office undid all his hard work? Yeah, it doesn't make sense. Like I said, over and over. That raid took a ton of resources, time, blood, sweat, tears, money. I mean, it's not free to send in all that, all those resources. As for this notion that Manson's parole officer couldn't find him in violation with charges from the DA, that's bullshit too, Watnick said. As promised, I went back to Gleason, who calmly but adamantly denied that Manson was an informant. He didn't even see a glimmer of possibility. I'm sure that I would have heard something like that, he told me. I never heard anything. Even if he was an LAPD informant, I'm sure I would have been contacted by LAPD. I never heard a word. He added, the guy was a jerk. Every cop I talked to wanted to get him buried. He's talking about Manson because a whole lot of them let him go. This doesn't make sense. But math ain't mathin', guys. All right, the next section is called CODA, a huge no-no. Remember, CODA means conclusion. Okay, I did most of my reporting on LASO in 2000. As with all aspects of my investigation, I kept thinking I'd return to the key subjects someday and try them again, seeing if the passage of time had loosened them up somehow. I imagined a cascade effect. Once I got somebody, say Vince Bugliosi or Terry Melcher, to admit to a major cover-up, other areas of the case would begin to open up too. Or I could brandish an incriminating document that would change people's minds. But you can guess what happened. I kept reporting, and time had other plans. In my obsession, I began to think of the story as a puzzle I could solve If only I recovered all the pieces. I listened again and again to my interview tapes. I wrote out intricate timelines listing my subjects' every move, day by day and sometimes hour by hour, trying to discern who knew what and when they knew it. I kept lists of possible explanations about gun laws and parole laws, car theft laws. Well, you saw what his little studio apartment or one-bedroom apartment looked like. He had massive amount of binders and notebooks and whiteboard with, a spider web of connections. I mean, it really did consume his life. And most critically, about how those laws were written and enforced in 1969. That is important to remember because things are just different now, and you have to see it. You have to understand how things worked at that time. There's no sense in going to like a detective right now and being like, how does this work? Because it might have been, certainly was very different in 1969. By 2005, I'd moved away from the LASO angle of the story, but I found myself constantly thinking about it. I knew I had to take another look at the archive to fill in some blanks. I was under the impression that I could go back anytime. I'd interviewed more than 40 deputies over the years, making no effort to hide my reporting. One of them had told me that the sheriff himself, Leroy Baca, wanted to learn about what I was doing and offer the sheriff department's cooperation. But no one, except evidently the pair of retired deputies who got me into the archive in the first place, had any idea that I'd accessed the LASO files on the case, which he wondered that at the time, but I'm sure he didn't question it because he was getting some major evidence. When I called the main office and asked to go back in, they were, to put it mildly, enraged. From the first officer I spoke to all the way up to Sheriff Baca, the response to my request was a resounding no. So he's lucky he got the stuff he did, and he got a lot of stuff. I argued that they'd set a precedent by letting me in before, unauthorized or not. Good luck with that argument. For accuracy's sake, they owed it to me and to the public, assuming I ever reached the end of my reporting, to let me in to recheck my notes. But because I'd never signed in anywhere, there was no record of my visits, they said, so it was like I'd never been there at all, even though I could show them the many files I'd photocopied. When I persisted, they allowed me to make my case in person with the sheriff's captain of homicide. I arrived to find not one, but 3 deputies who'd invented a new reason to keep me out. I couldn't go back in, they said, because there was an open case against unnamed family members involving stolen credit cards. BS, because this was 30 years later, and I can't imagine the statute of limitations lasting that long for the theft of credit cards. Give me a break. That is so lame. Oh, here it goes. That couldn't be, I said. The statute of limitations on any type of theft by the family would have long run out. They didn't care. Sergeant Paul Delhauer, who had more or less seized control of the meeting, told me there was just stuff you could never be told, will never know about regarding the case. Then he showed me the door. I wonder if they were peeing their pants, wondering what he had seen, if these guys even knew. Again, this was many, many years later. But I wonder if Tom O'Neill was like, oh man, there must be more that I didn't see, and maybe kicking himself when he didn't know what an opportunity he had, I guess, if there was more. When I'd been in the LASO archive all those years ago, it had been Delhauer's job to decide who got access and who didn't. For that reason, the sheriff's office had decided he was the guy who had to take all of my calls now. So I did call him again and again and again after that. We got on each other's nerves, and our conversations devolved into intense acrimony. What happened as far as you getting access to those materials, he said with the air of a marionette, was a huge no-no. Delhauer accepted that this no-no wasn't my fault, and in his more charitable moments, he allowed that it put me in a tricky position. But he didn't see what he could do to help. I don't really care, Tom, he said. I see absolutely no significance to those questions. They have nothing to do with the resolution of the case. They have nothing to do with the scope of the investigation. They were probably terrified that it might, overturn the verdicts, or at least give these characters a new trial and potentially put a bunch of murderers back on the street. Mass murderers, for that matter. I told him about Watnick's theory that Manson might have been an informant. This is rank speculation, he said. I honestly find this appalling. Well, of course it was speculation. That was one reason I tried to get back into the files, to see if there was any validity to it. I don't get paid to do your research, Delhauer said. Everybody seems to be jumping to conclusions about some big grandiose thing, he said. Worn down by my persistence, Delhauer finally agreed to remind Sheriff Baca of his long-ago offer of the Sheriff Department's cooperation. If I wrote a letter to Baca, Delhauer would make sure he received it. When Baca didn't respond to my letter, I was unrelenting, following up constantly. At last, I was granted an interview with the sheriff himself, who, it became apparent, had been thoroughly briefed on the angle I was pursuing, so it was probably another hard no. Elected to his post in 1998, Baca had become a major figure in California law enforcement. Heading the nation's largest sheriff's office, he oversaw 18,000 employees with a jurisdiction covering more than 4,000 square miles. Known as a strict enforcer with a no-nonsense style, he was at the peak of his power in November 2005 when we met at his headquarters. I followed him as he marched down a hall to his office. We sat at a coffee table. I was on a couch, he in an easy chair, tan and slightly stooped, wearing his uniform. Making it clear the meeting was going to be brief, he suggested I get right to my point. I wanted to get back into the files, I said, to learn why his department had been so lenient on Manson. Baca fixed me with an unblinking, unnerving stare and said, the reality is that Charlie Manson, as an individual, was a dopehead, a weirdo, a cultist, and a control freak. Charlie's not a guy who's going to get pimped by a cop. He seemed pretty fearless of them, I said. When they went to the ranch, he told them he had men in the hills with guns on them, which seems to me like something that a cop would not let go, personally. But I don't know if he's getting pimped by a cop, but if you've been, well, I don't want to give anything away too much. But I believe there was a mind control aspect to this, which we're getting to, I promise. It further exemplifies that he doesn't need anyone to help him. Look at the obvious here. He's not reliable even in terms of his own conditions. Now, if he's not reliable in defining himself, how is he going to be reliable in defining something useful for the cops? So maybe he wasn't an informant. I don't think he was an informant, but he was something else. Something more sinister, I believe. Most of what he said followed this line of thinking. Manson was too unstable to be of use to law enforcement. As for Gunther and Whitley's backing away from the case, he didn't want to touch it. Every sheriff I interviewed, I told him, said they couldn't get around the fact that Gunther and Whitley didn't go to the ranch. It does kind of seem like Detective 101. Not that I am one. I'm in no place to criticize, but it does seem kind of obvious just from the leads that we know about. I think that only they can account for why they didn't go, he said. It's interesting, in the pursuit of criminals, even when you're on the hot trail and something distracts the efforts that you're into, you'll say, I'll do that tomorrow, and then tomorrow's going to interfere with some other damn thing, and then before you know it, a whole week's gone by. I can see that, but still, it seems like a major drop off the ball. I know I get pulled away from something and then forget about it, and then a day later I'm like, oh no, I forgot to do XYZ, but this seems like a pretty big thing to forget about, if you ask me. I reminded him that this wasn't any old murder case. Gunther and Whitley truly believed, that their case was tied to the biggest unsolved murders in LA history, a crime that had the city living in fear. For decades, it sounded like. I can assure you that they aren't part of a larger deal-making person with a guy like Charles Manson. You can't hide something like that. You can destroy evidence of something like that, and I think you can hide it if you're really motivated to. If I present it this way, I said, implying that he was leaving me no other option, they're going to look like bad cops. Incompetent, not bad. I don't think that any cop wants to look either bad or incompetent, right? Our meeting ended almost as quickly as it started. Baca, who'd kept me waiting more than an hour, had to get to a dinner in Pasadena. We walked out together, trailed by his driver. Out in the dusk, he turned to me before we parted ways. If you'd like a little more assistance, I will get you in touch with someone who does run informants and let you throw that hypothetical at them, he said. Thinking of Manson, he added, he's a weirdo. What kind of cop is really going to rely on a weirdo for anything? But, I mean, of course that's true, but any kind of informant, I mean, typically they're criminals, right? So, I mean, they're relying on criminals to get information on other criminals a lot, and probably some of it isn't truthful. So they have to, I assume, take it all in and, you know, filter it through however they do. I don't know. Which, yeah, I don't know about you guys, but I find this fascinating, whole detective stuff and, you know, how they do their research, the stuff that Tom O'Neill researched, that stuff he got access to, the rabbit trails that sent him down. I am a total rabbit trail girl, as you may have noticed. I don't know. I think it'd be a pretty fascinating job, although it seems like a dangerous job too when you're sort of going to people and more or less accusing them of things or accusing them of knowing things, going into people's houses. I mean, going into a sheriff's office, who cares? Doesn't seem dangerous. But, you know, talking to people on their personal phone lines and them telling you to come to their apartment or whatever, I don't know. I guess for a man it might be less scary, but I don't know. I mean, it seems fascinating, but dangerous too, especially if you're coming close to the truth, and the truth is going to get somebody landed in jail or dead or whatever. Yeah, I guess it's pretty dangerous job. I didn't say anything. I knew it was useless. The sheriff had his mind made up before he met me. As his driver pulled up in his sedan, Baca gave me a final once-over, as if still not certain what to make of me. Then he shook his head, and getting into his car, said, "You got Hollywood fluff, like Marilyn Monroe was murdered. That's what you got." Well, I do have that book, if you guys are interested, about, this one here, about Bobby Kennedy being implicated in that. I think we are going to do that at some point. Or raise your hand if you're interested. It's not the next one I'm going to do, but it's definitely up there. A lot of y'all voted for it in the vote. But that's good. That's what sells books. Baca retired in 2014. In 2017, a jury found him guilty of obstructing an FBI investigation into inmate abuse at LA County jails. So he wasn't the most upstanding cop out there. He was sentenced to 3 years in federal prison. Before a packed courtroom, a U.S. district judge told him, "Your actions embarrass the thousands of men and women who put their lives on the line every day. They were a gross abuse of the trust the public placed in you. Blind obedience to a corrupt culture has serious consequences." So what else was he corrupt about? What else was he willing to lie about? I guess we'll never know, but I found Baca contemptuous and condescending that day in 2005. He did, however, make good on his offer to me, putting me in touch with the head of his detective division, Commander Robert Osborne, who was the closest thing LASO had to an expert on informants. I gave him my song and dance, well rehearsed by then, and while he found it unlikely that Manson had ever informed for his office, he said it was possible for a federal agency to call and ask for one of its informants to be released from LASO custody. Now that is fascinating, and it's also a clue to the future of this book. Okay, so I'm going to read that again because, it's everything to this, which I'm sure spurred Tom O'Neill on further. Like, wait, what? Okay, so if he's not an informant, police informant, maybe it's a federal agency. that he's doing the bidding of. Okay, I'm gonna read it again. He said it was possible for a federal agency to call and ask for one of its informants to be released from LASO custody. That would make a lot of sense. Why was he released so many times and not put back into jail for violating his parole? Makes you think. In such cases, they'd call the investigator. The captain would be uninvolved. Okay, so the captain gets to wash his hands of it all, or is ignorant of it, I guess. It's possible that a phone call was made, yes, but what benefit would be gained by keeping it a secret forever? Well, if it ended up making 7 people leave this earth, that might be reason enough. The theory that somebody asked them to do something different than the norm is not implausible, he admitted. Though I don't know why they wouldn't tell you. I can't imagine why they would want to keep it a secret. I don't see anything to be gained. If in fact there was some other agency involved in 1969 or 2005 to keep that quiet. Well, if they're doing secret mind control experiments, that would be a major reason. And I know this is probably a spoiler, I'm sure it is, but if you know much about MK Ultra, the mind control experiments of the CIA, the only reason that we even know about it, and most of the evidence of it was destroyed, we know just a tiny little fraction of it, was because somebody found some weird billing, probably again in one of these little warehouses, these little off the wall things that the right pair of eyes found, and now the world knows about it. But much of the documentation of it is gone with the wind, which sadly I believe is true of a lot of things. Epstein, the Kennedy stuff, yeah, they're releasing stuff, but I think it's been a lot of years that's gone by, and plenty of people that could have accidentally or not gotten rid of key information, incriminating information. That is just my opinion though. Okay, unless I thought it resulted in the murders of innocent people. There you go. I sense this was the closest thing to a concession I'd ever get from the LA County Sheriff's Office. I thanked Osborne for his time and went on my way. This is what desperation does to a writer. I knew that Gunther would be enraged if he learned that Baca had called him and Whitley incompetent. I wondered if this might be what would finally get him to break the code of silence. Maybe. The fact that he, one of the most legendary detectives in LASO history, had been denigrated by the head of his former office. I didn't have the heart to tell him, but I did tell one of his friends, who was understandably outraged. I had a hunch he'd share it with others. That's slick, Tom O'Neill, slick. Including Gunther. But it still took me 6 years to call him. 6 years? What? Why? When I did, he sounded tired and defeated. Not like the Charlie Gunther I remembered. He still had a funny way of calling me by my full name in conversation. I want to close the door on that, Tom O'Neill, Gunther said. I want to end it with you. Lee Baca kind of upset me. Our conversation is over. I apologized and explained why I didn't think he was incompetent and why I was sure that anyone who knew his record didn't either. But it didn't break the wall. 20 years I did this, he said quietly, referring to his time in homicide. And Baca said I'm incompetent. I just wanted to finish. Hell, I'm 83 years old. Poor guy though, I mean, I don't know, 83 years. Like I said, there's so much collateral damage from the Manson situation. I mean, I just follow these people for the rest of their lives, it seems like. I just want to write the truth about why those murders happened, I said. I know what you're saying, Tom, and I'd ask you to accommodate me. This is over 40 years ago, and I'd like to be out of it. Please, Tom O'Neill. I have no squabbles with you. I'm totally done. Gunther died in 2014. I was heartbroken by the frailty I heard in his voice that day, and I was confused. In the throes of my obsession with the case, I couldn't understand how such a celebrated detective would want to shut the door on it, to lose his drive to get to the bottom of it. But that was when I assumed I'd soon shut the door myself. This is 2014. It's another 10 years before the book comes out 10 years-ish. Now many more years have passed and the door is still open, and I understand Gunther perfectly. And that is the end of chapter 5, guys. That was a long chapter, 3 parts. 3 long parts, actually. So what did you all think? What stood out most to me is the part where he said that a federal agency could call and get somebody released, an informant released. Like I said, maybe he was an informant, but he was doing something, I believe, for a federal agency. And we will find out more about that in the future episodes. But I hope this is getting more interesting for you guys. And I'm so grateful for those of you who have stuck around. I know I've been all over the place lately. It's a crazy time of year for me. So also, I'm almost done. I have less than 2 weeks left at my job, and it's becoming real. It's starting to feel real. It's very bittersweet. I love that job, but it's a very long commute, and well, you guys probably don't care. I'm just rambling, but anyways, I am still going to push through and make as many episodes as I can before school lets out for the summer, because once that happens, it's a little more hectic at home because my kids are home and we're going on a long road trip to Yellowstone, so that should be fun. But anyways, I'm just going on and on. I hope you guys are enjoying this. I will see you soon for chapter 6. I think that one's going to be a 2-parter. Yeah. All right. You guys take care of yourselves, and I will see you in the next one. Okay. Bye.